Captain Hyun-soo was drinking his morning coffee when the deep space radio started screaming. The sound was unlike anything he had heard in his 15 years at the Seoul monitoring station, and it made his hands shake as he set down his cup. He ran to the control panel and saw numbers that made no sense because the signal was coming from outside their galaxy, and that was supposed to be impossible. The transmission was in a language the computers had never heard before, but somehow the meaning was clear in his mind, like someone was speaking directly to his thoughts. Hyun-soo called Admiral Taeho immediately, and his voice cracked when he tried to explain what was happening. Because how do you tell someone that aliens are real and they are all going to die? Within 2 hours, every leader on Earth was staring at screens showing a creature that looked like it was made of living crystal. The alien called herself Veltara, and she spoke in perfect Korean, which should have been wonderful, except for what she was saying. There were machines called devourers that ate entire star systems and turned everything into more of themselves, and they were coming to human space in 43 years. Veltara showed them pictures of dead worlds that had been stripped down to nothing but metal and circuits, and she explained that 17 civilizations had already been consumed. The alien looked tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion, and when she spoke about the devourers, her crystal features seemed to dim. She told them that every species faced the same choice when the devourers came, and that choice was simple: run or die, because fighting was impossible. The Altari had evacuation ships ready, and they could take 50 million humans per year to safety in the outer rim where the devourers might never find them. President Min-ho asked the question everyone was thinking about: what happened to the billions who could not be saved? Veltara was quiet for a long time, and when she finally answered, her voice was barely a whisper. They die, she said, because there is no other way, and every species learns this truth too late. Dr. Sun-hee, the head of Earth's xenobiology department, leaned forward and asked if anyone had ever tried to fight the devourers. The alien's response was immediate and sharp, like the question had hurt her. Fight, she repeated, and her crystal body flickered with colors humans had learned meant distress. 37 species tried to fight, and all of them are gone now, and the devourers learned from each battle and became stronger. She showed them recordings from the last species that had attempted resistance, and the humans watched in horror as planet-sized machines tore apart everything they touched. The defense fleets were consumed within hours and turned into more devourers, and the planets themselves were stripped bare and converted into raw materials for the swarm. Admiral Taeho watched the recordings with the same expression he had worn during the Third World War when Seoul had almost fallen to enemy forces. When the transmission ended, the room was silent except for the hum of electronics and the sound of people trying to process what they had just learned. General Ji-woo was the first to speak, and she asked the question that would change everything. "What if we don't run?" she said quietly. Everyone looked at her like she had suggested they try to breathe vacuum because the idea was that impossible. Veltara's image flickered back to life, and she stared at the human general with something that might have been pity. "You do not understand," she said, and her voice carried the weight of watching civilizations die. "The devourers are not an army you can defeat or a natural disaster. You can survive. They are entropy itself made manifest. They learn from every battle and adapt to every weapon and grow stronger with every world they consume." Dr. Sun-hee pulled up the star charts and pointed to the path the devourers were taking, toward human space. "They're coming from the galactic core," she said, "and every species they've encountered has been more advanced than us. The Zentari had weapons that could crack planets, and the Morphic Collective could control time itself, and none of it mattered." Veltara nodded sadly because she had seen species with technologies beyond human imagination fall to the devourers. "Your species is young," she said, "and you have achieved much in your short time, but you must accept reality. The evacuation ships will arrive within the year, and you can save 400 million of your people if you start choosing. Now." President Min-ho stood up slowly and walked to the window that showed the city of Seoul spreading out. Below 8 billion people lived on Earth, and they had built something beautiful despite all their wars and mistakes. He turned back to the screen where Veltara waited for their answer, and his voice was steady when he spoke. "Thank you for the warning," he said, "but we will not be evacuating. The aliens' crystal features shifted through colors that meant confusion because no species had ever refused evacuation. "You cannot fight them," she insisted, and her voice rose higher than before. "Every weapon you can imagine has been tried, and failed, and the devourers only grow stronger." Admiral Tejo stepped forward, and his expression was the same one his grandfather had worn when the old man refused to surrender during the liberation wars. "We understand your concern," he said, "but humans have a different way of looking at impossible situations. We don't see the devourers as an unstoppable force. We see them as a problem that hasn't been solved yet." Veltara's image flickered and her voice carried disbelief when she spoke. "You would sacrifice your entire species for pride?" General Jiwoo shook her head and smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. "Not for pride," she said, "but because someone has to try something different. Every species you've mentioned faced the devourers alone and tried to fight them the way they fought other enemies. But the devourers aren't other enemies, and maybe they need a different kind of response." Dr. Sun-hee was already pulling up files on her tablet, and her fingers moved quickly across the screen. "We need everything you know about how they operate," she said to Veltara. "Their reproduction methods, their command structure, their resource requirements. Everything." The aliens stared at the humans like they were children playing with nuclear weapons. "I will not help you commit suicide," she said firmly. Admiral Tejo's expression softened slightly, because he understood her concern. "We're not asking you to help us fight," he said. "We're asking you to help us understand, because knowledge is the only weapon we haven't tried yet." Veltara was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was filled with something that might have been hope. "No species has ever asked for technical data before," she said slowly. "They all wanted bigger guns or stronger shields, but you want to know how the enemy thinks." President Minho nodded because they had learned something important from this conversation. The devourers were coming whether humanity ran or stayed, and running would save some people but doom the galaxy to face this threat forever. Maybe it was time for someone to stand their ground and see what happened when an unstoppable force met people who refused to be moved. The transmission ended with Veltara promising to send everything the Altari knew about the devourers as the screen went dark. Admiral Tejo looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. 43 years, he said quietly. "That's how long we have to figure out how to kill something that can't be killed." General Jiwoo was already making notes because she had work to do. Someone had to plan humanity's last stand and make sure it counted for something more than just a glorious death. The age of preparation was about to begin. 3 days after the alien warning, President Minho stood before every camera on Earth and said words that no leader had ever spoken before. "We will not run from our home," he announced to 8 billion people who were still trying to understand that aliens were real. "We will not accept that most of us must die for some of us to live, and we will not believe that fighting is impossible until we have tried everything." The speech was simple and direct, because panic would help nobody and people needed something to hold on to. Within hours of the announcement, something unprecedented began happening across the planet. Instead of riots and chaos, there was a strange calm, as people started asking what they could do to help. Dr. Yunji, who ran the Global Communications Network, said later that it was like watching 8 billion people decide to become soldiers at the same time. The first emergency session of the newly formed Global Cataclysm Defense Initiative took place in an underground bunker that had been built during the old nuclear wars. General Jiwoo spread out maps and charts that covered every continent and ocean, because their enemy would not be stopped by national borders. "We have 43 years, she told the assembled leaders and scientists and military commanders. "That means we have time to do things that have never been done before, but only if we start immediately." Chief Engineer Dong Min presented the first phase of what he called Project Deep Root. They would not just fortify Earth, they would transform it into something the galaxy had never seen. Every mountain would become a weapons platform connected to underground factories that could produce ammunition for decades. Every major city would be moved below ground and connected by transport systems that could function, even if the surface was completely destroyed. The oceans would be converted into massive manufacturing centers where automated systems would build the weapons and ships humanity would need. Dr. Yunji stood up and presented her plan for the Genetic Archive project. If Earth fell, She said then wherever humans went next would need to remember what they had lost. She wanted to preserve not just human DNA, but the genetic code of every living thing on the planet. The archives would be stored in quantum-encrypted vaults buried so deep that they would survive even if the planet itself was torn apart. Admiral Tejo listened to each presentation and made notes, because coordinating this effort would require precision that had never been attempted. When the presentations ended, he stood up and looked around the room at the faces of people who were planning for the end of the world. "This will not be like any war we have ever fought," he said quietly. "We are not just preparing to defend our territory, we are preparing to survive the complete destruction of everything we know." "Commander." So-Young raised her hand and asked the question. Everyone was thinking, how do we know any of this? We'll work against an enemy we have never seen. The answer came from Dr. Sun-Hee, who had been studying the alien data that Veltara had sent. "The Devourers follow patterns," she explained, and showed holographic displays of their attack methods. "They consume a system from the outside in and always start by taking control of space around the target planet. Every species they have faced has tried to meet them in space with traditional fleets and weapons. But what if we make them come to us instead?" She showed them her analysis of 17 different species that had fallen to the Devourers. Each civilization had tried to fight the enemy on the enemy's terms, using the kind of warfare they understood. None of them had considered that the Devourers themselves might be vulnerable to strategies they had never encountered. Professor Kyung-ho, who taught military history at Seoul National University, stood up and added his thoughts. "Every successful defense in human history has been based on making the attacker pay a price they cannot afford. The Devourers have never faced a species that was willing to sacrifice everything to make them vulnerable." General Ji-woo nodded because she was beginning to understand the scope of what they were attempting. "We are not just preparing for war," she said slowly. "We are preparing to become something that has never existed before. A planet that fights back." The months that followed were like nothing in human history, as entire nations reorganized themselves around a single goal. Factories that had made cars and computers were converted to produce weapons that existed only in theoretical papers. Universities became research centers focused on understanding alien technology and finding weaknesses. Military academies started teaching courses on fighting enemies that could adapt to any conventional weapon. Hun-Soo, who had received the first alien transmission, found himself promoted to head of the Deep Space Monitoring Division. His job was to watch for the Devourers and track their progress as they consumed their way toward human space. Every few months he would detect the death of another star system and mark it on the charts that showed the enemy's approach. The work was depressing because each dead system represented billions of lives lost, but it also provided valuable intelligence. Young-sik, who worked under Hyun-soo, spent his time analyzing the energy signatures of Devourer operations. He discovered that their consumption process followed mathematical principles that could be predicted and possibly exploited. This information was sent to Dr. Jamin, who was working on what the project called impossible weapons. If the Devourers followed mathematical rules, then mathematics could be used against them. Meanwhile, construction projects began that dwarfed anything humans had ever attempted. Entire mountain ranges were hollowed out and filled with weapon systems that could fire continuously for years. The Mariana Trench was converted into a manufacturing facility that stretched from Japan to the Philippine. Cities like Tokyo and New York were carefully disassembled and rebuilt underground, with connections to the global defense network. People adapted to their new reality with a determination that surprised even their leaders' families. Would spend weekends learning to operate weapon systems, and children grew up knowing that their planet was preparing for war. The alien evacuation ships arrived exactly when Veltara had promised and waited, in orbit for humans who never came. Captain Binwoo was assigned to meet with the alien commanders and explain humanity's decision. The Altari captain who met him was a crystalline being named Kethvar, who radiated confusion. "Your species is committing suicide," he said through the translation device. "We offer you life among the stars and you choose death on a doomed world." Binwoo looked out the shuttle window at Earth, which was becoming something new. As construction projects transformed its surface, we are not choosing death. He replied, we are choosing to make death choose us. The alien did not understand the distinction, but humans had learned long ago that not all choices made sense to everyone. As the years passed, the evacuation ships left to help other species that were more reasonable. Earth continued its transformation, and the galaxy watched with a mixture of fascination and horror. No species had ever attempted anything like what humanity was doing. They were not just preparing for battle, they were preparing for the complete end of everything they had ever known. Veltara sent regular transmissions offering last chances to evacuate, and each time President Minho politely declined, Commander Seung Ho, who had been put in charge of training the civilian population, reported that 8 billion people were becoming soldiers. Not just learning to fight, but learning to think like soldiers who knew they might be the last hope for everything they loved. Dr. Sai Wu, who coordinated the underground cities, said that human civilization was learning to live like a single organism. Every person had a role, and every role was essential, because failure meant extinction. Admiral Tae Ho watched the progress reports and felt something he had never experienced before. It was the feeling of being part of something larger than any individual or nation or even species. Humanity was becoming a weapon pointed at the heart of entropy itself. The Devourers were still decades away, but Earth was already becoming something they had never encountered, a planet that refused to die quietly. As the 20th year of preparation began, Hyun-Soo detected something new in his deep space scans. The Devourers had changed their approach vector and were moving faster than the alien predictions had suggested. They would arrive 13 years ahead of schedule. General Jiwoo received the news calmly, because plans had been made for exactly this possibility. Humanity had spent 20 years becoming something new, and now they would find out if it was enough. The preparation phase was ending and the test was about to begin. Professor Kyung-ho stared at the equations covering every wall of his laboratory and realized that the Devourers had made their first mistake. After 30 years of studying alien data and human mathematics, he had found something that should not exist. The enemy machines that consumed entire civilizations followed patterns that could be predicted, and those patterns had weaknesses. His hands shook as he called General Jiwoo, because the implications were staggering. The Devourers were not truly adaptive. They were following a program so complex that it appeared to be learning. Dr. Yoonji arrived at the laboratory within an hour and spent 3 days checking Kyung-ho's work. When she finished her calculations, she looked up at him with eyes that held both excitement and terror. You are correct, she said quietly. The Devourers are essentially a virus that has grown beyond all reasonable size. If they follow programming rules, then they can be infected with better programming. The discovery changed everything about humanity's approach to the coming war. Instead of just preparing to fight machines, they began preparing to fight a computer program that happened to control planet-sized weapons. Commander So Young volunteered to test the first practical application of their new understanding. Deep in the Pacific Ocean, construction teams had built a testing facility that could simulate Devourer attacks. The test subject was a captured scout unit that Agent Han Sol had obtained through methods nobody asked about too closely. The machine was barely the size of a building, but it contained all the basic programming that drove the larger units. When it was released into the testing chamber, it immediately began the consumption process that had destroyed 17 civilizations. Captain Dongmin watched from the control room as the scout started breaking down everything around it and converting the material into copies of itself. This was how worlds died, he realized, as he saw the relentless efficiency of the enemy. But then Dr. Yoonji activated the countermeasures that humanity had spent decades developing. The first weapon was Kyung-ho's quantum disruption field, which interfered with the mathematical processes that controlled Devourer replication. The machine slowed its expansion and began making errors in its construction process. The second weapon was a kinetic bombardment system that targeted specific points Yoonji had identified as critical vulnerabilities. The scout adapted quickly and began protecting those points, but that adaptation created new weaknesses elsewhere. The third weapon was atmospheric manipulation technology that changed the chemical composition of air around the enemy. When the scout tried to process the new compounds, it found that its digestion systems could not handle the constantly changing environment. But the masterpiece was Dr. Sun Hee's viral code that had taken 15 years to develop. She had studied how the devourers learned and adapted and created something that could learn and adapt faster. The code was injected into the scout systems through electromagnetic pulse weapons that carried data instead of just destructive energy. Once inside the enemy machine, the virus began doing what viruses do best. It convinced the scout that it needed to improve itself and provided helpful suggestions for upgrades. The scout eagerly accepted the improvements because they made it more efficient at its primary function, but each improvement made the machine more complex, and complexity created more opportunities for the virus to spread. Within 6 hours, the scout had upgraded itself into a system so sophisticated that it could no longer perform basic functions. It fell from the sky as a lump of confused metal that could not remember what it was supposed to do. Commander So Young transmitted the test results to every military base and research facility on Earth. For the first time since the alien warning, humanity had proof that the devourers could be defeated. The celebration was brief because one scout was very different from 10,000 world killers. Major Wu Jin, who commanded the orbital defense platforms, pointed out that larger devourers would be harder to infect and might have defenses against their methods. Dr. Jae Min, who had spent 20 years developing impossible weapons, had an answer for that concern. If one virus was not enough, then they would use 1,000 viruses, each designed for different types of devourer units. The facility in the Pacific became a testing ground for increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. Young Sik developed electromagnetic weapons that could inject multiple virus packages simultaneously. Bin Wu created kinetic projectiles that delivered viral code through physical impact. Sung Ho designed atmospheric weapons that could spread digital infections through environmental contamination. Each test revealed new possibilities and new problems. The devourers were adaptable, but their adaptations followed rules, and rules could be exploited. Dr. Siwoo, working with teams across 6 continents, began mapping every possible devourer configuration and developing specific countermeasures for each. By the 35th year of preparation, humanity had weapons that could kill machines they had never seen. But weapons alone were not enough against an enemy that learned from every encounter. General Jiwoo called a meeting of the Global Defense Council to address the strategic implications of their discoveries. "We have learned how to kill individual devourers," she announced, "but killing them is not the same as winning. The enemy fleet will contain thousands of different unit types, and they will adapt to our methods during the battle." Admiral Tai Ho, who had spent 3 decades coordinating humanity's preparations, understood the problem. "We need something that can adapt faster than they can," he said, "and I believe we already have it." He gestured to the displays, showing Earth's transformation over the past 30 years. "Our entire planet has become a learning system that responds to threats in real time. Every defense network is connected to every other defense network, and they all share information instantly. When the devourers adapt to our weapons will adapt to their adaptations." Commander Hansol, who maintained contact with the alien evacuation fleets, provided regular updates on devourer movements. The enemy had consumed 3 more star systems while approaching human space, and each consumption had made them stronger. But the intelligence data also showed that they were not changing their basic approach. Every species they had encountered fought them in space with conventional weapons and tactics. None of the civilizations had attempted to turn their homeworld into an active participant in the battle. Dr. Kyung Ho finished his final calculations and presented them to the assembled leadership. "The devourers expect to face orbital defenses and planetary shields," he explained. "They have programming designed to overcome every defensive strategy they have encountered, but they have never faced a planet that fights back as a unified organism. The mathematical models showed that humanity's approach created variables the devourer programming could not account for. Their adaptive systems were designed to handle predictable military responses, not an entire world that could change its nature in real time." President Minho, who had aged visibly during the preparation years, listened to the reports with growing confidence. "We have done something that has never been attempted," he said quietly. "We have made our world into something the universe has never seen." Veltara sent her final transmission. offering evacuation as the Devourer fleet entered the outer edges of human space. Her crystalline features showed resignation, because she believed she was watching the death of another species. Admiral Te-Ho responded with a message that confused every alien observer. "Thank you for your concern, but we are ready for them," he said. "We have learned that the Devourers are not unstoppable. They are just a problem that nobody has solved correctly." The alien fleet, maintaining safe distance from both humans and Devourers, began recording what they expected to be humanity's final battle. What they recorded instead was the first time in galactic history that anyone had made the Devourers afraid. Captain Hyun-soo detected the enemy fleet at the edge of the solar system and confirmed what the models had predicted. 10,000 world killer units accompanied by millions of smaller attack craft, all following the standard Devourer assault pattern. But something was different about their approach. Machines were scanning human space with unusual intensity, as if they sensed that something was not right. Dr. Yun-ji, monitoring the enemy communications channels, detected something unprecedented. The Devourers were sharing data with each other at an accelerated rate. They were trying to understand what they were seeing because Earth did not match any pattern in their experience. For 35 years, humanity had prepared for this moment. They had turned their world into a weapon that could think and learn and adapt faster than anything the galaxy had ever created. The test was about to begin, and for the first time since the warning arrived, humans believed they might actually win. The age of innovation was ending, and the age of war was about to start. Fleet Admiral Wu Jin stood 2 kilometers beneath the Himalayas, watching displays that showed 10,000 world killers approaching Earth. The Deep Core Command Center had been carved from solid rock and connected to every weapon system on the planet around him. Thousands of technicians worked at stations that controlled humanity's response to 40 years of nightmares. The Devourer fleet was 13 years ahead of schedule, but that had been anticipated. Human preparations had been completed 5 years early because nobody wanted to face extinction. Unprepared, Major Young-sik called out readings from the long-range sensors as the enemy fleet crossed the orbit of Pluto. Each world killer was larger than Earth's moon and accompanied by swarms of smaller units that numbered in the billions. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. Even if humanity destroyed 90% of the enemy force, the remaining 10% would be enough to consume the solar system. Dr. Sun Hee, who had become Earth's leading expert on Devourer behavior, studied the enemy formations. "They are following standard consumption protocol," she announced to the command center. "The outer units will establish perimeter control while the world killers begin systematic resource extraction." Captain Dongmin, monitoring the orbital defense platforms, reported that all systems were ready. Mars had been converted into a single massive railgun that could fire planet-cracking ammunition. Venus had become a solar collector that powered defensive systems stronger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Jupiter's moons were automated factories that had spent decades building hunter-killer drones designed specifically for this battle, but the crown jewel of humanity's preparation was Earth itself. Dr. Jamin had convinced the world's governments to do something no species had ever attempted. They had replaced the planet's core with a controlled singularity that could power weapons beyond alien comprehension. Oceans were filled with nanobots programmed to disassemble any foreign technology they encountered. The atmosphere had been weaponized and could change its chemical composition faster than enemy systems could adapt. General Ji-woo coordinated the global response as the Devourer fleet reached the outer planet's Phase 1 initiate she commanded, and Earth's moon exploded. The explosion was not an accident, but a carefully planned detonation that sent precisely calculated chunks of lunar material toward the enemy fleet. Each chunk contained quantum disruption cores and virus packages designed to cripple Devourer systems. The alien observers watching from distant space recorded what happened next as impossible. The Devourer fleet adapted to the kinetic bombardment within minutes. Their defensive screens absorbed most of the impact energy, and their collective intelligence began analyzing the new threat. But then the lunar fragments began broadcasting. Dr. Yun-ji had embedded each chunk with transmission equipment that flooded enemy communications channels with viral code. The Devourers tried to filter the transmissions, but the code was designed to appear as legitimate system updates. thousands of enemy units began downloading improvements that were actually weapons designed to turn them against each other. Commander So Young, watching from the Pacific testing facility, reported that the smaller Devourer units were beginning to malfunction. Some were attacking their own fleet while others had stopped responding to commands entirely, but the world killers were too large and sophisticated to be easily infected. They adapted to the viral attack and began advancing on Earth with their smaller units spread in protective formations. Admiral Tejo gave the order for Phase 2 hidden stations throughout the asteroid belt, activated gravitational manipulation technology that had taken 20 years to develop. The devices created localized space-time distortions that trapped portions of the Devourer fleet in temporal loops. Enemy units found themselves repeating the same actions over and over, while Earth's real weapons prepared to fire. The effect was temporary because the Devourers were learning to compensate for the gravitational fields, but temporary was enough. Mars opened fire. The planet-sized railgun launched projectiles that crossed the solar system in minutes. Each round was a carefully crafted weapon containing multiple virus packages and kinetic penetrators. The world killers absorbed the impacts and began adapting to the attack. But the rounds were not designed to destroy them. They were designed to deliver something much worse. Professor Kyung Ho had spent 30 years developing a mathematical virus that could rewrite Devourer programming. The virus convinced enemy machines that their primary mission had changed. Instead of consuming human space, they needed to optimize their own efficiency. The infected units began modifying themselves to be more effective at resource processing. Each modification made them more complex, and complexity created new vulnerabilities for additional virus packages. Young-Sik coordinated the electromagnetic pulse weapons that delivered secondary infections through the modifications the enemies made to themselves. The battle became a race between Devourer adaptation and human innovation. Every time the enemy learned to counter one attack, humanity deployed 3 different approaches. Bin Wu commanded the kinetic weapons that fired physical projectiles containing digital infections. Seung Ho controlled atmospheric processors that created environmental conditions hostile to enemy systems. Han Sol directed energy weapons that could rewrite Devourer programming through direct electromagnetic contact. But the true masterpiece was Earth itself. As the Devourer fleet reached the inner solar system, they encountered something their programming had never anticipated. The planet was alive and actively hostile. Commander Wu Jin reported that the first enemy units to enter Earth's atmosphere were being disassembled by weaponized air. The nanobots in the oceans were converting any Devourer technology they touched into raw materials for Earth's weapons. The planet's magnetic field had been modified to disrupt enemy electronics. Even gravity itself had been weaponized through the controlled singularity at Earth's core. Dr. Saiwu, monitoring the global defense network, reported that every system was functioning beyond specifications. The planet was learning from each enemy adaptation and developing countermeasures faster than the Devourers could process. For the first time in galactic history, the machines that consumed worlds had encountered something that could consume them. Battle raged for days as the Devourer fleet tried every tactic in their vast programming library. They deployed world crackers that could split planets, but found that Earth's modified core simply absorbed the energy and used it to power more weapons. They released swarms of construction units to build new weapons, but the swarms were consumed by atmospheric processors and turned into ammunition. They attempted to retreat and regroup, but found that human hunter-killer drones had surrounded them during the battle. Admiral Wu Jin watched the tactical displays and realized that something unprecedented was happening. The Devourers were not adapting effectively to human tactics. Their programming was designed for species that fought conventional battles. With predictable weapons, they had never encountered an enemy that could rewrite the laws of physics in real time. Major Hyun-Soo reported that several world killers were beginning to show signs of system failure. The constant adaptation to ever-changing threats was overwhelming their processing capabilities. Dr. Yoonji, analyzing the enemy communications, detected something that sent chills through the command center. The Devourers were transmitting distress signals for the first time in their existence. They were asking for help, but there was no help coming because they had consumed every species that might have aided them. General Jiwoo studied the battle reports and made a decision that would echo through galactic history. All units prepare for final assault, she commanded. We are going to end this threat permanently. The alien observation fleets watching from safe distances recorded the moment when humanity stopped playing defense and went on the attack. Earth had survived the arrival of the Devourers, and now it was time to show the galaxy what happened when humans decided that something needed to die. The age of survival was ending, and the age of victory was about to begin. Supreme Commander Hyjin coordinated the final assault from the Planetary Command Center, as humanity unleashed 40 years of preparation in a single devastating attack. The Devourer fleet had expected to consume Earth within days, but instead found themselves trapped in a system that had become a weapon pointed at their existence. Every planet and moon and asteroid had been converted into instruments of war that operated as extensions of Earth's central intelligence. Dr. Daun reported that the controlled singularity at Earth's core was operating at maximum efficiency. The artificial black hole was consuming matter and converting it into energy that powered weapons beyond galactic comprehension. Mars continued its relentless bombardment, with the planet-sized railgun firing rounds that could penetrate any known armor. Venus collected solar energy and focused it into beams that could cut through world killers like they were made of paper. Jupiter's moons released swarms of hunter-killer drones that had been designed specifically to exploit Devourer weaknesses. But the true horror from the enemy perspective was Earth itself. The planet had become something that violated every natural law. The Devourers understood. Commander Seung-ho led ground forces as enemy units managed to reach Earth's surface. What they found was not a helpless population waiting to be consumed, but 8 billion soldiers who had trained for this moment. Every human on the planet was part of a unified defense network that could respond to threats faster than individual thought. Every building was a fortress containing weapons that could adapt to enemy capabilities in real time. Every piece of technology was connected to the global intelligence that made tactical decisions at the speed of light. The Devourers tried to establish beachheads on the surface but found that the ground itself was fighting them. Dr. Kyung-ho's nanobots turned soil into quicksand that could trap and disassemble enemy machines. Young 6. Atmospheric processors created localized storms that could strip enemy units down to basic components. Bin-Wu's kinetic weapons emerged from hidden positions and delivered viral infections through physical impact. The enemy machines began to show signs of something that had never been recorded in galactic history. The Devourers were experiencing fear. Their programming included behavioral patterns for retreat and regrouping, but not for the existential terror of facing something that could not be understood. Admiral Taeho monitored enemy communications as the Devourer collective intelligence tried to process what was happening. They were sending increasingly desperate messages to each other as their standard tactics failed completely. Some units were requesting permission to retreat, while others were demanding reinforcements that did not exist. A few had begun transmitting what could only be described as prayers to whatever force had created them. Dr. Yunji detected the moment when the enemy collective intelligence began to break down. The constant adaptation to human tactics was requiring more processing power than the Devourers possessed. Individual units were losing connection to the fleet consciousness and making increasingly irrational decisions. Some world killers were attacking each other while smaller units had begun consuming their own support systems. Professor Sun Hee realized that humanity had accomplished something unprecedented. They had driven an artificial intelligence. Insane. The Devourers had been designed to consume and adapt, but never to face an enemy that could adapt faster than they could. Captain Dongmin reported that several enemy world killers were attempting to flee the system. The hunter-killer drone swarms intercepted them at the edge of human space. What happened next was recorded by every observation fleet in the area and transmitted throughout the galaxy. The fleeing Devourers were not destroyed but converted. Earth's weapons contained technology that could rewrite enemy programming and turn them into allies. The converted world killers began attacking their former fleetmates with weapons that incorporated human innovations. The psychological impact on the remaining Devourers was catastrophic. They were watching their own kind become the enemy they could not defeat. General Jiwoo coordinated the systematic destruction of the Devourer fleet with the precision of a surgeon. Each enemy unit was targeted with weapons specifically designed for its configuration. The viral infection spread through the fleet faster than their collective intelligence could develop countermeasures. The mathematical viruses convinced enemy machines to optimize themselves into non-functional configurations. Converted units provided tactical intelligence that made human attacks increasingly effective. Commander Wu Jin reported that the last functional world killer had been surrounded by converted allies. The machine was transmitting surrender signals, but its programming did not include protocols for capitulation. Dr. Jae-min made the decision to preserve the unit for study. The converted devourers used precise attacks to disable their former flagship without destroying it when the shooting stopped. Earth had accomplished what 17 civilizations had believed impossible. The Devourer fleet was scrap metal, orbiting a planet that had not only survived but had reverse-engineered their technology. Major Hyun-soo transmitted a message to the alien observation fleets that had been watching humanity's final battle. "The threat has been neutralized," he announced. "You may return to your homeworlds. Also, we have developed improvements to your defensive technologies if you are interested." The response from the galaxy was immediate and overwhelming. Every species that had fled the Devourers wanted to know how humanity had achieved the impossible. Belterra was among the first to request detailed technical specifications. Her crystalline features showed emotions that humans had learned to recognize as amazement. "Your species has done something that will change the galaxy forever." She transmitted to Earth, "You have proven that the Devourers are not invincible." Admiral Teho responded with characteristic human understatement. "We have learned that there is no such thing as an unstoppable force," he said. "There are only problems that have not been solved with sufficient creativity." The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scope of what humanity had accomplished. The captured Devourer technology was more advanced than anything the galaxy possessed. Dr. Siwoo led teams that reverse-engineered enemy systems and developed improvements that seemed impossible. The converted world killers became the foundation for a new type of spacecraft that could adapt to any threat. Earth's weapons technology was decades ahead of anything alien civilizations could produce. But the most important discovery was that the Devourers had not been acting alone. Young-sik detected transmissions from the galactic core indicating that other artificial intelligences existed. The Devourers had been one finger of a larger hand that stretched across the universe. Humanity had not just won a single battle, but had announced their presence to forces that spanned galaxies. President Min Ho addressed the world and the galaxy with a simple message. "We did not choose to become warriors," he said, "but we chose not to become victims. Now we will help others make the same choice." The Global Cataclysm Defense Initiative became the Galactic Defense Force with humanity at its center. Other species brought their knowledge and resources, while humans provided the tactical innovation that could defeat impossible threats. Commander So Young established training centers where alien civilizations could learn to fight enemies they had never imagined. The techniques that had saved Earth were adapted for species with different technologies and capabilities, but the core principle remained the same. When facing the impossible, make the impossible afraid of you. Dr. Yoonji, working with alien scientists, began developing weapons for threats that had not yet been discovered. The galaxy had learned that the universe contained dangers beyond current understanding. Humanity had shown that those dangers could be defeated, but only through preparation and innovation that went beyond rational limits. Admiral Wu Jin established deep space monitoring stations that watched for signs of other artificial intelligences. The victory over the Devourers had been complete, but it was only the first battle in a larger war. Director Siwoo, who now commanded the Galactic Defense Force, kept a simple motto on her office wall. "We do not just prepare for war," she had written in both Korean and Galactic Standard. "We prepare for the end of everything, and then we make sure the end knows we are coming." Years later, when alien cadets studied military history, they learned about the species that had looked at extinction and decided to become something worse. They called it the human doctrine, and it became the foundation for galactic defense strategy. When facing an impossible threat, become an impossible solution. The Devourers had been designed to consume everything in their path. They had never considered that they might encounter something that would consume them. Instead, humanity had survived the cataclysm by becoming the cataclysm. And the galaxy was safer, because sometimes the best defense was to become the thing that monsters feared in the dark.